They said it was impossible, too fragile, too complicated, no way it would survive a real war. But one stubborn gunsmith refused to give up. And when the bullets started flying in Korea, his rejected invention turned ordinary rifles into the deadliest sniper weapons on the battlefield. How did a scope nobody wanted become the secret behind America's most feared snipers? This is the story of the Unertl, where failure met genius and legends were born. It's the middle of World War II, and the U.S. Army is desperate for an edge. The battlefields of Europe and the Pacific are a sniper's nightmare: mud, rain, fog, and chaos. American marksmen are good, but their equipment is basic. Most rely on iron sights or scopes that fog up, lose zero, or break at the worst possible moment. The enemy, meanwhile, is getting better. German and Japanese snipers are picking off officers and machine gunners, turning every advance into a deadly game of hide and seek. In a small workshop in Pennsylvania, a gunsmith named John Unertl is working late into the night. He's a perfectionist, a man obsessed with precision. His hands are steady, his eyes sharp, and his mind is always turning over new ideas. He's built scopes for hunters and target shooters, but now the Army wants something more. A scope that can turn an ordinary rifle into a weapon of surgical accuracy, a tool that can survive the mud and madness of war. Unertl sketches designs, tests lenses, and experiments with new materials. He dreams of a scope that's long, bright, and deadly accurate. But when he presents his prototype to the Army, the response is cold. The scope is too fragile, they say, too complicated. The long tube and external adjustments look strange, and the brass and glass seem delicate compared to the rugged rifles they're meant to ride. The Army's ordnance officers shake their heads. It'll never survive the field, they tell him. It's a target shooter's toy, not a soldier's tool. Unertl is frustrated, but he doesn't give up. He knows what his scope can do. He's seen it hold zero after 100 shots, stay clear in the rain, and let a shooter put bullet after bullet through the same hole at 300 yards. He believes in his idea even if nobody else does. The war drags on. American snipers do their best with what they have, but the stories from the front are grim. Scopes fog up in the jungle, lose zero in the cold, and break when dropped or knocked against a helmet. Some snipers go back to iron sights, trusting their eyes and instincts over unreliable glass. The Army keeps looking for a better solution, but nothing seems to work. Then, in the final months of the war, something changes. A few Marine snipers, frustrated with their issued scopes, get their hands on Unertl's design. They mount the long, gleaming tubes on their Springfield rifles and take them into the field. The results are immediate and deadly. The Unertl scope holds zero, stays clear, and lets the Marines pick off enemy soldiers at ranges nobody thought possible. Word spreads quickly. The impossible scope is making a difference. After the war, the Army and Marines take another look at Unertl's invention. They test it in the lab, in the field, and on the range. The scope is still fragile, still complicated, but it works. It's accurate, repeatable, and, if handled with care, surprisingly tough. The military places a small order, then a bigger one. Unertl's workshop grows, and his name becomes known among snipers and marksmen across the country. But the real test is yet to come. In 1950, war erupts in Korea. The fighting is brutal. Mountains, snow, and mud. American snipers are needed more than ever, and this time, they're armed with the Unertl scope. The long tube and external adjustments, once mocked, become the tools of legends. Snipers pick off enemy officers, machine gunners, and mortar crews from impossible distances. The scope's clarity and precision turn the tide in countless small battles. One Marine sniper, known only as White Feather, racks up a record number of kills with his Unertl-equipped rifle. His story becomes legend, and the scope that was once rejected is now in high demand. The Army and Marines scramble to get more scopes to the front, and Unertl's workshop works around the clock. But the story isn't just about technology, it's about the men who use it, the snipers who crawl through mud, wait for hours in the cold, and risk everything for a single shot. It's about the lessons learned on the battlefield, that the best equipment is the one that works when you need it. That precision matters more than power, and that sometimes the impossible idea is the one that changes everything. As the Korean War grinds on, the Unertl scope becomes a symbol of American ingenuity and stubbornness. It's not perfect. Snipers still have to baby it, protect it from knocks and drops, and clean it after every mission. But it works, and it saves lives. Back in Pennsylvania, John Unertl reads the letters from the front. Snipers thank him for giving them an edge, for helping them survive, for making their impossible shots possible. He's proud, but he's also haunted by the knowledge that every innovation in war comes at a cost. He keeps working, keeps improving, always searching for the next breakthrough. The story of the Unertl scope is a story of failure, persistence, and ultimate triumph. It is a reminder that the best ideas are often the ones nobody believes in until they prove themselves in the heat of battle. But what happens when the war ends? Does the Unertl scope fade into history, or does it leave a legacy that shapes the future of sniping? And what lessons do the engineers and soldiers take home from the battlefields of Korea? That's where the story gets even more interesting. The Korean winter is brutal. Snow drifts pile up against the sandbags, and the wind cuts through every layer of clothing. In the hills and valleys, American snipers settle into their hides, breath fogging in the cold, hands wrapped around the long, gleaming tubes of their Unertl scopes. The rifles are heavy, the scopes even heavier, but the men trust them. They've learned that in this war, patience and precision are everything. The enemy is clever. North Korean and Chinese soldiers move at night, dig deep trenches, and use the terrain to their advantage. But the snipers have learned a few tricks of their own. They use the Unertl S magnification to spot movement hundreds of yards away, just a flicker of a helmet, a glint of metal, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. They wait for hours, sometimes days, for the perfect shot. One night, a young Marine named Jack huddles in his foxhole watching a frozen river. He's been told the enemy will try to cross before dawn. His hands are numb, but he keeps his eye glued to the scope, adjusting the focus with careful, practiced movements. Suddenly, he sees them. 3 figures creeping across the ice. He holds his breath, lines up the crosshairs, and squeezes the trigger. The shot echoes in the stillness, and one of the figures drops. The others scatter, but Jack's already working the bolt, ready for another shot. After the mission, Jack cleans his rifle and scope, careful not to jar the delicate adjustments. He knows the Unertl isn't perfect. It can fog up if he's not careful, and the long tube can get knocked out of alignment if he's rough with it. But he also knows that without it, he'd be just another target in the snow. Back at headquarters, the brass are paying attention. Reports come in from the front. Snipers with Unertl scopes are making shots at distances nobody thought possible. Enemy officers are being picked off, machine gun nests silenced, and patrols scattered. The kill counts are rising, and the enemy is starting to fear the long, silent reach of the American snipers. But not everyone is convinced. Some officers still grumble about the scope's fragility, its complexity, the way it needs to be babied. They argue for simpler, more rugged designs, but the snipers push back. They know what works, and they're willing to put in the extra effort to keep their edge. The Unertl scope becomes a symbol of the sniper's art, a tool that rewards skill, patience, and care. It's not for everyone, but for those who master it, it's a game changer. As the war drags on, the snipers develop new tactics. They use the scope's magnification to spot enemy snipers, to call in artillery, to direct mortar fire. They become the eyes of the battlefield, trusted by their commanders and feared by the enemy. The Unertl, once dismissed as impossible, is now a legend. But the war is changing. New technologies are on the horizon. Better optics, new rifles, new ways of fighting. Some snipers wonder if the Unertl's days are numbered. Others are just grateful for every day it keeps them alive. One night, as Jack sits cleaning his rifle by lantern light, he thinks about the gunsmith who built his scope. He wonders if the man ever imagined his invention would end up here, in the frozen hills of Korea, changing the course of battles and saving lives. Jack smiles, wipes the lens one last time, and tucks the scope away. Tomorrow he'll be back in his hide, waiting for the next shot, trusting in the impossible idea that became his lifeline. But as the war winds down, a new question hangs in the air. What will happen to the Unertl scope and the men who used it when the shooting finally stops? The armistice comes quietly, almost as if the war is just pausing for breath. The snipers pack up their rifles, stow their Unertl scopes, and wait for orders. Some are relieved, others restless. The battlefield is littered with memories, spent shells, empty foxholes, and the ghosts of shots taken in the cold dawn. For many, the Unertl scope is more than a piece of equipment. It's a companion, a silent partner that saw them through the worst nights. Back in the States, word of the scope's success spreads. Letters from Korea tell of impossible shots, of enemy officers dropped at 600 yards, of patrols turned back by a single unseen marksman. The Army and Marines take notice. The Unertl, once rejected as too fragile, is now in demand. Gunsmiths and engineers study the design, looking for ways to make it tougher, lighter, easier to use. The lessons of Korea are clear. Precision matters, and the right tool in the right hands can change the course of a battle. John Unertl, the man behind the scope, reads the reports with a mix of pride and humility. He knows his invention isn't perfect. He's heard the stories of scopes knocked out of alignment, of lenses fogged by the Korean winter, of snipers cursing as they try to make a shot with frozen fingers. But he also knows the stories of lives saved, of missions accomplished, of men who came home because they could see farther and shoot straighter than the enemy. The military begins to rethink its approach to sniping. Training programs expand. New rifles are tested, new scopes designed. The Unertl's long tube and external adjustments become the standard by which other optics are measured. Snipers are no longer seen as lone wolves, but as essential members of the team. Scouts, spotters, and force multipliers. Some of the men who use the Unertl in Korea go on to teach the next generation. They tell stories of crawling through the snow, of waiting for hours for a single shot, of the satisfaction that comes from knowing you made a difference. They teach patience, discipline, and the importance of caring for your equipment. Treat your scope like your best friend, one old sergeant says. It'll save your life if you let it. But not everyone is ready to move on. Some snipers keep their Unertl scopes as souvenirs, reminders of a time when an impossible idea became their edge. Others write letters to Unertl, thanking him for believing in his invention, for not giving up when the army said no. A few even visit his workshop, shaking his hand and telling him face to face what his scope meant to them. The story of the Unertl scope becomes a legend in military circles. It's told in sniper schools, in gun shops, and around campfires. It's a story of failure and persistence, of skepticism and vindication, of how one man's stubborn belief in precision changed the way America fought its wars. But as new wars loom on the horizon and new technologies emerge, a question remains. Will the lessons of the Unertl scope be remembered, or will they be lost in the rush for something newer, faster, and more complicated? The answer, as always, lies with the men and women who pick up the rifle, look through the glass, and trust their lives to the impossible idea that became a legend. Years pass, and the world changes. The Korean War fades into memory, replaced by new conflicts, new technologies, and new generations of soldiers. But the story of the Unertl scope and the men who used it doesn't disappear. In sniper schools across America, instructors still tell the tale of the gunsmith who wouldn't give up, of the scope that was too fragile for war until it wasn't. Some of the old snipers, now gray-haired and walking with a limp, return to the ranges as instructors. They bring their battered rifles and long, gleaming scopes, showing young recruits how to adjust the turrets, how to keep the lenses clear, how to wait for the perfect shot. They talk about patience, about discipline, about the strange mix of fear and focus that comes with lying in the snow for hours, waiting for a target to appear. The new generation listens, sometimes with skepticism, sometimes with awe. They're used to modern optics, shorter, tougher, packed with features. But when they look through the Unertl, they see what their predecessors saw. A clear, bright image, a crosshair that seems to reach out and touch the target. They hear the stories of Korea, of impossible shots and narrow escapes, and they begin to understand that technology is only part of the equation. The rest is skill and heart, and the willingness to trust in something that everyone else said was impossible. The military, too, remembers. The lessons of the Unertl scope shaped the design of new sniper rifles and optics. Engineers study the old blueprints, looking for ways to combine the precision of the past with the ruggedness of the present. The idea of matching equipment to the environment, of building tools for the real world, not just the test range, becomes a guiding principle. John Unertl, now an old man, receives letters from soldiers in Vietnam, in the Middle East, in places he's never seen. They thank him for his stubbornness, for his belief in precision, for giving them a fighting chance. He keeps the letters in a box, reading them on quiet nights, remembering the long hours in his workshop, the frustration of rejection, the thrill of seeing his idea come to life on the battlefield. The Unertl scope becomes a collector's item, prized by shooters and historians alike. Museums display them alongside the rifles they once rode, telling the story of the impossible idea that changed the way America fought. The legend grows, passed down from one generation to the next. But the real legacy of the Unertl scope isn't in the glass and metal. It's in the men and women who learned to trust their eyes, their hands, and their instincts. It's in the belief that even the most unlikely idea can make a difference if you're willing to fight for it. And so, as the years roll on, the story of the Unertl scope lives on, not just as a piece of history, but as a lesson in courage, persistence, and the power of believing in the impossible.